Imagine this. You wake up in the morning, you're probably in your teenage years. You wake up for school. Dread sets in. Nobody wants to go to school. Some think of it as a form of punishment in those years. They think of it as something they really don't want to do. Well, I feel like everybody has felt this at some point in their life, whether it be about work, hospitals, or even just school itself. It's a fairly common narrative that a lot of people kind of joke about from time to time with each other. Well, Michael Foucault, a French philosopher, said, "Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons?" I find that very interesting. It's a very interesting comparison here, because these are spaces meant to nurture and grow and feel better, like with hospitals. These are safe spaces, but they're being compared to places of punishment and bad things with negative connotation. And I'm going to kind of talk about how that kind of related to me and why I chose this guy as my guy who did a quote. So let's talk about Michael for a second. Michael Foucault was a French philosopher, and he wrote a book about the theory of discipline and punishment. He wrote this book in 1975, and he mainly focused on relationships with power and knowledge and how they are used in forms of social control. He was a political activist, and he did a lot of things that were based on social control. In 1975, a lot of things that are happening right now are a lot of education movements, a lot that have to do with personal rights, personal freedoms, anti-discriminatory laws, whether it came from having disabilities or race. They made sure like the Ideas Act came into fruition during this time. So this quote, to me personally, I take it as these structures of spaces meant to nurture mimic those meant to punish, which is really interesting because it creates this pressure. It's almost like these safe spaces that we think are safe kind of aren't, because they use the same structure, but they are at the same time. But what he kind of was more talking about is panoptic spaces. Panoptic means power is exercised through constant surveillance and monitoring, and using that as a form of control. Now, monitoring and surveillance isn't necessarily a bad thing, like in schools, hospitals, and work environments, but in prisons, it's a form of punishment. You're not free. You're not free to do whatever you want. And he's kind of talking about the big brother is watching mentality, like in books and such that have come out. And he's talking about mentality and power dynamics that happen in that. So something that personally happened with me is my sister. She actually struggled with going to school a lot. She struggled with the way school worked. She struggled with just how it was formatted. And it was because they were forcing her to do this one specific thing and to do it their way, and constantly watching her. And she felt all of this pressure, and school just wasn't working for her. So when she got out of that environment, she didn't drop out. She just went to an alternative school that had alternative ways of teaching, who didn't really monitor your actual work, but they just monitored what you did around the school. Honestly, I felt like that school was more like a prison. It actually felt better for her. She felt like she had more control. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing to be monitored. And I personally had some struggles with hospitals. I've been in and out of hospitals since I was little. I have a lot of health issues. And I think hospitals are very akin to prisons. They look like prisons. They feel like prisons. They feel like you're trapped. You want to get out as soon as possible. I've never heard anybody who said, I want to stay at a hospital for years and years on end. So in conclusion, Michael Foucault said, "Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons?" He was talking about how these places of nurturing mimic these places of punishments. And I related to that through my health struggles and through my sister's personal struggles with school. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you think there's a way to make the surveillance in hospitals and schools like more of a positive or like a less restrictive experience? I don't know. Is there a way to make these environments feel less like a prison, do you think?
I feel like because we compare these things to prisons, it's more of the control mentality of, you have to do what I say. You do as I say, not as I do. You do this specific thing at this specific time. It's just structure, basically. And prisons have been known to use structure as a form of punishment, but it actually, like, depending on the person, it's punishment. It depends how your brain works. Like with my sister, she just didn't work with the structure of a typical high school. It wasn't working with her. She was having breakdowns every day. It didn't match with how her brain chemistry worked. So it depends on the person. So it doesn't need to be this one like linear,
Right.
like everything's on the same level. Like maybe changing it up per person. Like I've had good hospital experiences. I've had hospitals that didn't feel like prisons, but the one at home wasn't fun. Like, you know, it's, and it kind of has to do with a little bit of structural stuff too, like fluorescent lights. Those
Yeah.
are meant to create like a sterile environment. And because the actual temperature of those light, color temperature of those lights actually lean a little green, it's almost sickening, especially when you have like a white wall like this.
Yeah, I agree. I hate fluorescent lighting. Totally ruins my mood.
It ruins the vibe.
Yeah, thank you.
Where did you find this quote?
So I actually was given it to me as an assignment for something for graphic design. We are doing something for the political science area. We're making some posters, and this was the one that actually was assigned to me, and I found it, and it was actually really interesting, and I found it really cool. It's kind of a touchy quote because it does kind of poke at political things a little bit, because he's talking about social climates. But I still found it interesting that he's comparing, we make this joke that school is like prison. We don't want to be here. High school's prison, but he actually made that connection in 1975. We cannot hear you, Mina.
Sorry about that.
You're
Did you have
good.
any trouble like feeling like school was hard for you and you did too as well?
Oh, yeah, I am an art student. I have that imposter syndrome every day. Am I doing the correct thing? Why did I choose something that's fun and creative? What if I don't have it? Because, there's the parent thing of you're not going to have a job. Why are you doing art? When there actually is all of these creative jobs that kind of are the baseline of kind of how things work. Like if you look at the pandemic, uh, everybody jumped to creative things like movies, books, cooking, music. Like these are what kept people going. So I use that as kind of a way to keep me on track and keep me in a positive mindset. Also, I'm doing something I love, which is fun, instead of doing something like pharmaceuticals like I was almost gonna do.
This is unrelated, but I'm just curious, what kind of art do you do?
So I'm a photographer. I do conceptual photography, basically. I I work a little bit more in studio. I do in the studio, so I work with like lighting and kind of more like fashion photography, like you'd see in like Vogue and such. I personally like alt process photo is more mainly my deal. So it's using printmaking processes like cyanotype. So if you see like the blue light reactive things, like a lot of people will print flowers and such on cyanotype. That's what I do, and I make a lot of sculptures out of it. Like I've made a corset recently out of it that was really fun.
That's amazing. Cool. I want to see some of your work someday.
When we stop the recording, I can screen share. Any other questions? Maybe about the quote, maybe about the time period? No? Okay, then we're good.